that both sides committed themselves timelessly to an open border. And that is all wrapped up if we ever move to the Northern Ireland Protocol. And it would be quite shameful if either the European Union or the Republic of Ireland or the United Kingdom was given the right unilaterally to terminate that at a time of its political choosing. So it's perfectly sensible that you also agree that both the United Kingdom and the European Union will have reasons to hesitate before going into the protocol. They may prefer to extend the transition agreement, and neither of the parties will have any political motive for staying indefinitely in that protocol. So he has, I think, in his exposition, and is this what he was trying to do, got rid of all these theories, all the ones about the ECJ still being involved, as it obviously got to be, in the rights of British citizens after we leave, and enable the House to get back to the real political debate that we have got to have in the next few days.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm most grateful to the right honourable gentleman for his question. The truth of the matter is that this Northern Ireland Protocol would represent a solemn commitment to the people of Northern Ireland that this government will honour and respect the Belfast Agreement. I make no bones about it. I would have preferred to have seen a unilateral right of termination in this backstop. I would have preferred to have seen a clause that allowed us to exit if negotiations had irretrievably broken down. But I am prepared to lend my support to this agreement because I do not believe, I'm most grateful for those cheers of applause. I do not believe, Mr. Speaker, that we are likely to be entrapped in it permanently. I can give reasons why I say that, but the right honourable gentleman has already foreshadowed them. So I do agree with the right honourable gentleman. This represents a sensible compromise. It has unattractive elements, unsatisfactory elements for us. But the question for the House is to weigh it up against the other potential alternatives and to assess whether it amounts to a calculated risk that this government and this House should take in these circumstances, weighed up against the realities of the alternatives.
Joanna Cherry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the binding motion passed by this House on the 13th of November ordered the production of any legal advice in full, including that provided by the Attorney-General, and with a particular focus on the Northern Ireland backstop. Not a commentary, but the legal advice in full. The House didn't divide. The government effectively conceded that these were exceptional circumstances and that the normal, very important convention wouldn't apply. And so that ship has sailed. Now, the Attorney-General and I are both senior lawyers in our own jurisdictions, so I'm sure he won't want to insult my intelligence or that of the House by pretending that this command paper reflects in any way the nuanced advice that he will have given to the Cabinet, focused on particular questions such as those we saw it leaked over the weekend. For example, he's just said that it's not his belief that we'll be trapped in the backstop permanently. But this House, who has to take the final decision, not the Cabinet, is not interested in his belief. It's interested in his legal opinion. So can he confirm for me that I am right in saying that there is nothing, as a matter of law, which will not prevent the backstop from becoming the permanent UK-EU relationship in the event that neither side can agree a future economic relationship? That is the matter of law. And also, will he acknowledge this? He's a Democrat. The government are Democrats. They've gone on incessantly about the will of the people for the last 2 years, and they profess to believe in parliamentary sovereignty. We, sitting in this House, are the representatives of the people. We voted to see his advice, not his commentary, his advice in full. So will he give an undertaking that he will produce that advice, the sort of nuggets that were leaked over the weekend, but in full, before the rise of the House today and before the debate tomorrow? Or is he prepared to run the risk of being found in contempt of Parliament merely to protect the Conservative and Unionist Party against further internal strife?
I have the greatest of respect, if I may say so, to the honourable member. She's put her case rationally and reasonably. Let me deal with it, if I can, one by one. First, she asked me, is there anything to prevent it becoming, the protocol becoming permanent in the event of no agreement? As a matter of international law, no. The fact of the matter is, it would endure indefinitely, pending a future agreement being arranged. However, that does not exhaust all the matters of law. As a matter of European Union law, it would in those circumstances be highly vulnerable to legal challenge. It is widely accepted, including by the European Union Commission and Task Force 50, that Article 50 is not a sound legal foundation for permanent arrangements between future states. If negotiations irretrievably broke down, it would de facto become permanent, and it would therefore fall to be seriously challengeable in the Court of Justice of the European Union for being invalid. That legal certainty by itself is sufficient to promote the European Union to do a deal with us. Legal uncertainty of that type is profoundly detrimental to thousands, indeed millions of traders throughout the single market. That is one factor that convinces me, Mr. Speaker, that this risk is a risk worth taking.
Mr. Ian Duncan Smith.
Mr. Speaker, can I start by welcoming without reservation my right honourable and learned friend to his position. He knows that I have long since, many years, believed this is the post that he should have filled. Can I say in welcoming his statement, can I simply say that I reference Note 8, page 6 of his document, and there it makes a reference in Note 6 to what is defined as good faith. And he references the International Court of Justice, and he won't mind if I just quickly quote this to him from that. He talks about how long should this be, what defines good faith. And it says, the failure of parties to reach an agreement 16 years after the conclusion of earlier negotiations does not in itself establish that either party has breached its obligations to negotiate in good faith. Now, he will know his right honourable friends on the front bench, one by one, have used good faith as their defence for being locked in to this whole problem of the backstop, and thus how we will then get out. Does he not therefore agree that, and would he answer this in this sense, is it that good faith is required for best endeavours as a matter of law or not?
Mr. Speaker, the duty of good faith and the duty to use best endeavours is a legally enforceable duty. But there is no doubt that it is difficult to prove, as I hear from a sedentary position. That is not to say it has not been proven. And the case reports of the International Court of Justice, as well as arbitral tribunals throughout the world, have recorded decisions where tribunals have found breaches of good faith duties. There would need to be clear and convincing evidence that the breakdown of communications was due to bad faith. Fully accept that. But if the European Union refused to engage with us, or was strung out the negotiations in a thoroughly unreasonable way, or failed to observe reasonable time limits, all of those matters would be hallmark marks of a possible case of breach of good faith. It is a meaningful legal obligation. And may I remind Mr. Speaker of the House this. We are dealing here with the United Kingdom on one hand and the European Union on the other. Their reputations in international fora, their reputations as a question of international law, are at stake. If you put your name to a solemn legal obligation to negotiate something in good faith by a certain time limit, then it is a very serious obligation for you to acquit yourself of. It cannot just be played fast and loose with.
Mr. Nigel Dodds. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And can I say that I have the utmost and deep respect for the right honourable gentleman, and he knows that in terms of his approach to these issues and the discussions that we have had. But it is deeply unsatisfactory. He said this whole business was deeply unsatisfactory and unattractive, which makes me wonder why he's recommending it. And it seems to me a situation where we're now reliant on our learned friends to take cases in international courts rather than this sovereign parliament being able to decide when we can get out of these arrangements. Can the Attorney-General confirm what he said, that this is an indefinite arrangement, that it can be permanent despite what some of his cabinet colleagues are saying in law, it can be permanent? And would he confirm, and I don't have time to go into all of this because, as other honourable members have said, we need to see the actual legal advice as requested by this House, and that must happen. Can he confirm that under Article 15 of the Northern Ireland Protocol, that the Northern Ireland customs arrangements means that Northern Ireland will form part of the EU customs territory and not the United Kingdom's, although a single customs territory is established between the UK and the EU? And would he confirm that under Article 4 of the Protocol that there is a new right under international law, one that isn't in the 1998 agreement, for the EU to oversee certain aspects of the implementation of the Belfast Agreement? I add those as detailed points which I will follow up with him further in discussions, but the overall context of this is, as he has said, a deeply unattractive, unsatisfactory presentation, and he needs to therefore, rather than recommend this agreement, recommend that it be rejected.
Nigel Dodds there of the DUP. You're watching the BBC News at 5, and the Attorney-General, Jeff Cox, taking questions after making a statement to the House outlining a summary, I reiterate, a summary, not full disclosure, of his legal advice to the Prime Minister concerning her Brexit deal. Let's get the very latest on all of this with our correspondent, Ben Wright, who's at Westminster for us. Now, Ben, the Attorney-General is saying he doesn't particularly like the fact that the Northern Ireland backstop is in this deal. He would prefer that there was a unilateral term of exit. But he believes, given all the risks, weighing things up, this was the best of a bad lot.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Clive. Like most cabinet ministers now, is stressing the fact that this withdrawal deal is a compromise. Geoffrey Cox said divorce stirs high emotion and calls for wisdom and forbearance. And he says this process of leaving the EU will just take time. It was pretty gripping political theatre, enhanced by Geoffrey Cox's booming baritone, which I think is entertaining quite a lot of people in the Commons at the moment on both sides of this argument. But he was asked whether or not the backstop, the Irish protocol, that could kick in if there is no agreement reached that will guarantee a soft border on the island of Ireland, would be temporary, whether the UK would pull out, could pull out unilaterally. And this is what Geoffrey Cox said.
Let me make no bones about the Northern Ireland Protocol. It will subsist. We are indefinitely committed to it if it came into force. There is no point in my trying, or the government trying, to disguise that fact. The truth, however, is what is the political imperative of either entering it or not entering it. And that is a calculated equation of risk that each member of this House is going to have to weigh up.
Now, Nick Thomas-Symonds, who's the Labour Shadow Solicitor General, is not impressed by the fact that the Attorney General turned up and read out a statement. Labour and other opposition parties, including the DUP, are urging the government to publish in full the legal advice underpinning this withdrawal agreement. And this is what he had to say.
This document that has been produced is, in the Attorney-General's own words, a legal commentary that's been produced with his oversight and indeed approval. It is not the final legal advice to Cabinet. I should also say, frankly, Mr. Speaker, that a longer and more detailed explainer was produced alongside the withdrawal agreement than this document, it has to be said. Isn't the reality of this situation that the government does not want MPs to see the full legal advice for fear of the political consequences?
Now, the argument continues in the chamber now. Itching to get back in there is the Tory MP Bernard Jenkin, Brexiteer, of course. Mr Jenkin, from what you've heard so far, has the legal summary that the Attorney General is providing in the Commons giving you any reassurance about how the backstop will work?
Well, yes and no. Yes, he's given a far more candid account of the legal situation we will be faced with if we're in the withdrawal agreement and the backstop. And I really do commend him for that. But no, because what he has confirmed is that we could be stuck in the backstop indefinitely. He's been very, very straightforward about that. He says that's not a legal question, it's a political question. But what a terrible position for the United Kingdom to be in, that we can't get out of the arrangements that the Prime Minister is recommending by just voting in Parliament to leave those arrangements. We would have to go to some international court and plead our case, and we might lose. And that seems to be an unacceptable position for the United Kingdom to be in. We have a unilateral right to leave the European Union through Article 50, but we do not have, and he was very explicit about this, we do not have a unilateral right to leave the Northern Ireland backstop.
But Ken Clarke, one of your own Tory MPs, asked the Attorney General, or put the point to him, that surely the whole point of a backstop is that it can't be terminated unilaterally. It's an insurance policy. There has to be an agreement, a political agreement, between both parties as to when the right moment to move beyond it has arrived.
Look, this whole thing...
It's about peace on the island of Ireland, ultimately.
And nobody wants a hard border in Northern Ireland. And the Prime Minister was completely unable to explain on Monday in front of the Liaison Committee about who would actually put up the infrastructure. The British government won't, the Irish government won't. Is the European Union going to force the Irish government to put up infrastructure? I don't think so. This whole row about the potential for a hard border in Northern Ireland has been concocted in order to put the United Kingdom into a weak negotiating position. We have explained to the Commission and to the British government why it is quite possible to have a customs frontier between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland by doing the checks away from the border, like they do for VAT, like they do for excise duties. That would be the way to resolve this problem.
And yet the EU and the UK accept that those technological solutions are not in existence now to avoid the sort of insurance policy they've written into the withdrawal agreement.
Well, that's actually wrong, because the techniques and procedures that have been recommended by customs experts, upon whose advice we have drawn, have not invented anything new. These are things that happen through the Mont Blanc tunnel, for example. They happen through between Switzerland and France. They happen across other frontiers in the world where they have just-in-time supply chains. And this is why the Prime Minister felt obliged in the political declaration to include reference to these techniques and procedures to have invisible frontiers between the European Union and the United Kingdom in the future.
Geoffrey Cox said that, as I said, divorce can be ugly, but he thinks that this allows separation to occur peacefully and in an orderly way. Yet you and Brexiteer Tory backbenchers refuse to compromise at all, don't you? Which is why there is a risk of this deal being voted down and a disorderly exit.
Well, when you say refuse to compromise, we never wanted a withdrawal agreement with this implementation period as it is framed. We would accept that. We never thought it was necessary for us to pay £39 billion as an exit fee. We decided to accept that. We've decided to compromise on many, many things. But to join an agreement which we cannot leave unilaterally, we cannot choose when to leave, that is giving up power, it's not taking back control, and we can't have that.
Bernard Jenkin, many thanks.
Thank you very much.
Heading back into the chamber now to quiz the Attorney General in what is a pretty dramatic afternoon, actually, Clive.
Indeed. All right, Ben, thank you. Ben right there at the Commons. OK, well, with me in the studio is Dr. Catherine Haddon, a constitutional expert and senior fellow at the Institute for Government. It's good to see you. Thanks for coming in. We're going to discuss, certainly to begin with, at least, the Attorney General's advice and the suggestion that he is under no obligation, as Labour and others would have wanted, for him to release the full advice that he gave to the Prime Minister relating to her Brexit deal. Is that an obligation that holds water as far as you're concerned?
The obligation not to release, yeah, constitutionally, it's part of the advice that the government gets on a range of issues, policy advice of all sorts of different kinds. So part Parliament are trying to set a new precedent. We saw with the Iraq War a big battle over what the Attorney General's advice had been in the run-up to that war, so there is previous ground in this territory. But Parliament is part of a wider issue where they're trying to assert their right to get information about Brexit and what's going to happen.
But it's not an absolute privilege, is it? And on November the 13th, we know that a private motion was put forward which required the government, as a result of Parliament voting for this, to give full details concerning the Brexit deal, and that would require the Prime Minister giving the full details of the advice she was given on this deal. So some are arguing that in not doing this, she's actually in contempt of Parliament, isn't she?
That's right, yeah, which is why it's such an important battle of wills between the two of them. It's very similar in a way to what happened with David Davis some months ago when there was an attempt to get the impact assessments out that government had been supposedly preparing on the different options, but Parliament tried to set down very firmly that they needed to have these, and when they actually turned out, they didn't seem to be worth as much as Parliament had been thinking. So it's kind of part of a long history where you have a very assertive Parliament, partly because of the issue, but also because it's a minority government, so they have the votes to be able to try and force the government to bring this kind of information out.
Does it feel to you as if that's what this is about? It's a political gambit that is being played by the Labour Party or the Scottish Nationalists and so on, because they do see a weak government. They see an opportunity to bash Theresa May over their head, as it were.
Yeah, they're trying to get the information out because they have a feeling about what might be in it. It's the issues that we've been seeing discussed today about what does the backstop actually mean, what's the legal agreement. And there's a very important reason why Parliament's focusing on this. They haven't actually seen the act that will put this deal into practice. The Withdrawal Act, which will follow this meaningful vote, is going to be how we're legally going about doing this, and Parliament's still not had a chance to see that on paper, so it's trying to get as much detail as possible to understand what's going on there.
But to be clear, there are exceptional circumstances in which an Attorney General can release the full as long as the Prime Minister of the day agrees, release the full details of the legal advice that they give to that Prime Minister.
There's nothing preventing them from releasing it except for the fact that they have chosen not to and are sticking to this line thus far. We'll see whether this continues and whether Parliament does actually manage to force them to release the whole thing.
Well, one wonders what more of an exceptional circumstance you could have than the UK changing its relationship with its biggest trading partner, probably the biggest constitutional change since the Second World War.
Absolutely, but then those who are trying to say it shouldn't be released will argue the other way, that it's such a crucial piece of information that the government making these kind of policy choices needs to get all of the facts, needs to have them as honest as possible no matter what the circumstance. It's the same reason why governments have been very reluctant to release a lot of the sort of crucial policy advice that they get on any number of issues. But yeah, I mean the totemic issue for Parliament is this is such a crucial vote and this is such a sort of important aspect of it. What does the agreement actually mean? What does the deal actually what's it actually going to mean for the country, not just how is it set out in the paper that Theresa May's put out thus far.
Sure. OK. Dr. Catherine Haddon from the Institute for Government. Thanks for joining us, Catherine. Thank you. Now we're going to move on. We'll bring you more, obviously, from that debate in the comments throughout the next half an hour or so. But now, Sir David Attenborough has described climate change as humanity's greatest threat in thousands of years. The naturalist and broadcaster said it could lead to the collapse of civilizations and the extinction of much of the natural world. He was speaking at the opening ceremony of the United Nations-sponsored climate talks in Poland. The meeting is seen as the most critical on climate change since the 2015 Paris Agreement and is being attended by around 40 heads of state and government. Our environment correspondent Matt McGrath is at the summit and sent us this report.
All across the world, the disastrous impact of a changing climate can be clearly seen, say scientists. From fires to floods to droughts and deadly storms, the fingerprints of humanity's use of fossil fuels continues to emerge. Against this worrying background, the celebrated Sir David Attenborough came to tell UN negotiators the harsh truth about the threat posed by climate change to humans and animals alike.
Right now, we're facing a man-made disaster of global scale, our greatest threat in thousands of years. climate change. If we don't take action, the collapse of our civilizations and the extinction of much of the natural world is on the horizon. Leaders of the world, you must lead. The continuation of our civilizations and the natural world upon which we depend is in your hands.
Sir David is not the only one raising his voice. In demonstrations around the world, young people have made it clear that this meeting must deliver significant action on cutting emissions. Some of the negotiators here agree that the issue is one of life and death.
The most important, critical, one of the key messages coming out of the IPCC is that the world needs to act. We literally have 12 years and we need massive investments on financial flows. If we don't have that financial flows, we are doomed.
But one of the big hurdles to progress on rising emissions is the dependence of many nations on coal.
Many delegates believe that to avoid deadly climate change, coal, the dirtiest fossil fuel, has no role in the future. But the Polish government disagrees vehemently. They say that it's a key part of the economy in this part of Poland, and it's literally under our feet here at this conference.
The pressure on the negotiators here has perhaps never been greater, but scientists believe that equally the threat to our fragile planet has never been more intense.
Matt McGrath reporting for us there. Well, after addressing the conference, Sir David spoke to our science editor, David Shukman.
Well, of course, daunting and a great privilege, really, and I suppose a responsibility. I mean, you're supposed to be recognising or representing people who are badly hit by what's happening to the climate right now, at the forefront. I mean, contributing in that little montage we had of people whose houses have been wrecked, whose homes have gone, you know, and I have a responsibility, I suppose, simply by the fact that all these voices are gathered together in this extraordinary 21st century way of presenting the views of people who hitherto have not been represented. And all over the world there are people who are suffering as a consequence of climate, whose voices haven't been heard. At least they believe they've not been heard. And this is one way in which you can perhaps allow that to happen.
Because up until now, progress in the negotiations has been incredibly slow. Is there anything that you might have said that could change that, do you think?
I don't know, but my feeling, there was a sense of urgency this morning, I thought, in the Assembly. I'm not an experienced, I've been to one before, that's all, which was the Paris Agreement. But there was a real sense of impending disaster and needing to take action right now. And the fact that the World Bank announced here that they were doubling the amount of money that was going to be available for this particular problem was a real statement. I mean, I thought it was something that should make us gulp and say, yes, well, people are taking notice of what's happening to the world. Not before time, but they are.
There's a branch of the environmental movement that thinks that everything is going way too slowly. Extinction Rebellion, they closed bridges in London. Are you sympathetic or are you critical of what effectively amounts to civil disobedience?
People need to make their feelings heard. And what we're doing in this particular programme was to have a mechanism whereby they can actually express their feelings on the internet. And register what they feel. And certainly, why not? Of course, because the first thing they've got to be aware of, and they are aware of, is what we're doing to the world. And they need to be able to say something about it, and politicians need to take notice.
The two Davids there, Sir David Attenborough and David Shukman, speaking at that UN Climate Change Conference in Poland, which takes us neatly onto the weather. And Chris Fawkes is here, and you've got a rather alarming picture behind you there.
It's incredible. Well, you can make out one just there, but actually it's a triple rainbow, Clive. Yes, you can see one there, there's another one there, and another one there. And these things are very, very rare. According to some on the internet, these things hadn't been photographed before 2011, so it is incredibly rare to see that. And Gordon in Gloucestershire spotted one for us today and sent us a picture, one of the pictures of the year, I think. Now, looking at the weather overnight, we're going to continue feeding in showers across the north and west. Elsewhere, the cloud clears, and with temperatures falling away, there's going to be a widespread and sharp frost developing. Worth bearing in mind, we could have some icy stretches where those showers come in, particularly for western Scotland, perhaps some icy patches on untreated roads into the north of Wales and northwest England as well. So, a cold start to the day on Tuesday, and Tuesday promises, I think, to be the coolest day of this week weather-wise. After a cold and frosty start, we'll see plenty of sunshine, but it will tend to cloud over as the day goes by, particularly across England and Wales. And temperature-wise, a much cooler day than today. Highs typically between 5 and 7, but a little bit milder than that in the far southwest. That's the latest weather.
Good afternoon. You're watching the BBC News at 5. Our top stories. And the Attorney General, Geoffrey Cox, defends the government's decision not to publish his full legal advice on Brexit. His MPs call for more details. Time is against us. That's the warning from the naturalist Sir David Attenborough as critical UN climate talks begin in Poland. The man who admitted killing 28-year-old midwife Samantha Eastwood is sentenced to a minimum of 17 years in prison. Now, time for all the sports news from the BBC Sports.
Selby or Higgins or Williams, then obviously they're going deep in the tournament, so it doesn't really suit them. You know, at some point they're going to crash and burn, and you know, it's not just one trip to China for 4 tournaments, it's like 5 or 6 different trips, and that can be like 1 week you're in China, 1 week you're in Coventry, and the next week you're back in China. Eventually that does catch up on you, and you end up with someone like Higgins that's burnt out.
Well, that is all the sport for now. Plenty more on those stories on the BBC Sport website, bbc.co.uk/sport. We'll be back again soon.
Sarah, thank you for that. Now let's return to our top story, and the Attorney General, Geoffrey Cox, has confirmed to MPs that neither the UK or the EU can unilaterally end the Northern Ireland backstop arrangement if it came into force. Now, he's been setting out a summary of the legal advice he gave Theresa May over her Brexit deal and told the Commons he didn't believe, if implemented, the backstop would be permanent.
Let me make no bones about the Northern Ireland Protocol. It will subsist. We are indefinitely committed to it if it came into force. There is no point in my trying, or the government trying, to disguise that fact. The truth, however, is, what is the political imperative of either entering it or not entering it? And that is a calculated equation of risk that each member of this House is going to have to weigh up.
Well, our political correspondent Ben Wright is in Westminster. Assurances there as far as he could give them from Mr. Cox. But do you think those people who haven't already made up their minds about the Northern Ireland backstop might be convinced by what he had to say?
Well, in some ways, Clive, that's why I think this is a little bit of a red herring, this whole argument, because I think for Brexiteers who hate the backstop, they hate it because they can read it in all its glory and nitty-gritty detail in the withdrawal agreement as it stands. I'm not sure they're learning very much more from the Attorney General now, although he is confirming what they have always said, which is there is no unilateral escape mechanism from it, and that's one of the things they hate about it. The political argument rumbling alongside, of course, is how candid or not the government is being, whether or not it should publish the full legal advice rather than just relying on this summary statement from the Attorney General. Well, with me now is Owen Smith, the Labour MP. Some scenes in there, I thought, over the last hour. It's a very charged atmosphere, isn't it?
Yes, I mean, it was like the end of the pier show from the Attorney General. He was clearly enjoying himself as he hasn't done ever before. But 2 really important things at the heart of it that are serious. One, I think it is a serious breach of the protocols of the House of Commons, that the man who is responsible with keeping the government honest, making sure they observe the law, is effectively flouting the law. He's flouting the will of the House of Commons to publish the full, unexpurgated legal advice, and he's refusing to do that.
Well, that's because you passed the Commons passed a resolution last month saying that it wanted to see the full legal advice.
Yes, and the Speaker confirmed that that wasn't just a matter of opinion from the House, it was the House telling the government and binding the government to produce that advice, and they've refused to do that today.
But it would be unprecedented, wouldn't it? The legal advice for Iraq wasn't published. There is no example you can draw on of when full legal advice given in confidence by the top government lawyer has been made public.
Well, I don't think that's right, and several members today have cited 4 or 5 examples, admittedly
not in living memory.
Well, in the depths of time. However, as the Attorney General himself has said today, these are exceptional circumstances, and in exceptional circumstances such as Iraq, I think the right thing to do would be to publicly advise. We got it wrong then. He should have got it right today and published it.
Now, in terms of the actual mechanics of the way the backstop will work, I mean, you're dead set on opposing the deal that has been reached, but do you think the backstop is unavoidable as part of a withdrawal treaty that a government would have to sign with the EU? And does it make sense that this needs to, in the end, be negotiated politically as to when one party chooses to leave or not?
Well, the important thing of substance that the Attorney General confirmed today is that the Brexiteers' fears are absolutely well placed. This backstop will apply indefinitely unless a trade agreement is agreed between the European Union and the UK. And the way in which the last 2 years has gone doesn't give anybody, I think, any cause to be confident that that will be achieved. But it is right that any government will have to include a backstop of some sort in order to secure an open border between North and Southern Ireland, and in order to make sure we honoured the Good Friday Agreement. What I think is not being adequately considered by the government are the risks to the politics of the Good Friday Agreement if we ever fall into the backstop, because we've seen the way in which the unionist community, the DUP in this place, but unionists more broadly in Northern Ireland, see the backstop as anathema. What would that do to the politics, the finely balanced politics of Northern Ireland? And that isn't something that's been properly considered.
One quick related issue. If this deal is voted down in the Commons on the 11th of December, it's anybody's guess what happens then. You want another referendum, don't you? Do you think that the Labour leadership at that point will swing behind one?
Well, I hope so. I've campaigned for another referendum for the last 2.5 years, and that is because I believe that politically and economically our country, and the only way in which we can legitimately stop it is through the people changing their mind at a second referendum. Jeremy Corbyn seems to be coming round to my way of thinking on that. John McDonnell certainly has done, and I hope the Labour Party will swing full square behind it.
Thanks, Owen Smith, very much indeed. Clive, Geoffrey Cox still on his feet, booming away in the House of Commons chamber, but for now, back to you.
Yeah, he has got a powerful voice, Mr. Cox. Thanks for that, Ben. Now we're going to move on to the story of a man who's been jailed for at least 16 years for murdering the midwife Samantha Eastwood. Michael Sterling, who'd been in a relationship with her, had already admitted killing the 28-year-old from Stoke-on-Trent. Her body was found in a shallow grave near Caverswall in Staffordshire 8 days after she went missing. Here's Joe Black.
Why are we jumping out of an aeroplane today?
To raise money for 2 charities. One's called For Louis and another one's Children's Hospice where we live, called Donna Louise.
Samantha Eastwood living her life to the full. She was a much-loved daughter, sister and friend to many. The 28-year-old was a midwife, a career she'd set her sights on since she was 12. But after a night shift at the Royal Stoke University Hospital, she vanished. Her colleagues never saw her again. She was murdered, suffocated during an argument by this man, Michael Sterling, a man she was in a relationship with. He was married, a family man, and also the brother-in-law of her former fiancé.
It was here at this isolated spot where Samantha Eastwood's body was discovered. She was buried in a shallow grave, wrapped in a duvet, with tape around her eyes and face.
CCTV captured the landscape gardener driving around in his van. He was panicking, looking for somewhere to dispose of her body. As searches for Samantha began, Sterling helped with those efforts and even offered comfort to her distraught. He also secretly used her mobile phone to send messages to them, suggesting she needed some time alone.
To go to those levels of deceit to the family, it's just unthinkable really, and I liken his actions to that of Ian Huntley, who was the ever helpful person in the initial inquiries with the police and the family. And I can't begin to say how enraged Gemma, Samantha's sister, is in terms of that hug. The impact that hug alone has had on Gemma is huge, because it's one thing killing and sympathise with the family and lay false alibis out that would tend to suggest she's still alive. It's just horrendous.
What have you done to Samantha? No comment. Have you killed Samantha Eastwood? No comment. If you have...
Once arrested, Sterling gave little away, but when he got to court he pleaded guilty to murder.
We all wanted to find her alive and we didn't. To have somebody who delivers so much life into this world through being a midwife, to have her life taken so tragically is awful. I like us to finish on remembering her and not Michael Sterling.
That was amazing. Thank you.
Sterling said he was deeply sorry, not for himself, but for all the others who are victims of his crime. Those words will mean very little to Samantha Eastwood's family, who are now facing their first Christmas without her. Joe Black, BBC News.
The number of working people in poverty has reached the highest on record. A new report from a think tank campaigning to tackle poverty, the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, says 4 million workers in the UK now live in poverty, a figure that's gone up by 500,000 in the last 5 years. But the government says there are 1 million less families living in absolute poverty since 2010. Our Home Affairs correspondent Danny Savage reports from Buxton in Derbyshire.
I open curtains every morning and hope for the best.
Sue Prince constantly worries about money.
Every day I check my bank. I need to know what's coming in and going out of my account.
She has 3 part-time jobs, but it still leaves her with precious little to live on after paying her overheads.
My rent is £495 a month, plus there's other household bills as well. I'm still only left with about £80 a month. And that has to buy me food and top my gas and electrical. Buxton's a bit out there and out in the sticks, and it does get cold.
On a Tuesday, the day ends with a visit to an informal food bank.
And how important is getting this food to you each week?
Very. It is to me anyway.
Where Sue collects a few days' worth of supplies.
I was embarrassed at first, quite embarrassed, but now, I don't know, it's come as a way of life for me, you know. And I know I need it. I wouldn't do it if I didn't need it.
For £1.50 a visit.
Thank you.
Food which is donated, damaged or nearly out of date is handed out. They can't afford to buy it, so need this. They then return to their homes on this estate in rural Derbyshire. Just a handful of the 4 million people in the UK it's claimed are in work but living below the poverty line.
Keeping the rent going, keeping a roof over your head is often a really high priority. We also then find that trying to pay the water bill, the electricity, the heating, council tax. And so what a lot of people will do is they will be rotating between those different bills and each week working out which one don't I pay.
The government, though, says far fewer people are living in poverty and household incomes have never been higher. Sue is getting a little more money now she's moved on to universal credit, but is still reliant on food handouts and doesn't see that changing. Danny Savage, BBC News, Buxton.
Figures compiled by the BBC suggest that 20,000 jobs have been lost in the retail sector this year. A similar number of people are also threatened with redundancy. Rising costs, sluggish sales and online competition are just some of the factors blamed for the demise of names such as Maplin, Toys R Us and Poundworld. Our business correspondent Theo Leggett has the story.
John Brailsford has worked in retail all his life. He's been made redundant 5 times.
Watch that rug.
Most recently, earlier this year, by Carpetright, which has closed a swathe of its stores. He's since found another job, and he says others should be encouraged by his example.
If you are made redundant, don't panic. Just take a step back. Find the company that you want to work for. There's plenty of jobs out there. If you have to take a lower position, take one. If I can do it, anybody can do it.
John is one of thousands of retail workers who've been affected by a chill wind blowing down the high street. Household names like Toys R Us and BHS have disappeared, while other